This is The Wilderness and the Wellspring, a podcast about the difficult times when you want to give up on your creative pursuits and the beauty of the act of creation. I'm your host, Jeff Lunt. This is episode 12, Taking Risks. I wanted to talk today about taking risk. I'm going to start by telling you a story. Many years ago, back when I was living in Arizona, I was driving on the highway, and it was the middle of the late afternoon. Traffic was moving at a good pace, and everything seemed to be going normally. All the vehicles around me were doing a normal speed, and they were all moving predictably. And then suddenly, there was a slight movement in a vehicle to my left. I was driving on the highway, and to my left, or in the lane to my left, there was a full-size van. The van had been cruising along at normal speed the whole time. It was within my vision until the last second, where it sort of just jerked briefly. The movement was not wild or violent, and it was just a fraction of a second. It was just like a blink of an eye almost. But I happened to be observing it, and I happened to see it. And what that triggered in my mind at the time was, that's not normal. It wasn't a conscious thought framed in those words or anything. It's just that my reaction to it was, that's not normal. So I lifted my foot up off the accelerator and I just started to drift. My car started to drift, which increased the distance between me and this van. Well, just a few seconds later, the van made another movement, but this one was definitely violent and wild, where it swerved suddenly left then right and made this big curve and sort of like wound up rotating 90 degrees and smashing into the vehicle to its left and coming to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. Now, this is a highway where the speed was 55, 65 miles an hour, something like that. It is not a good thing for a car that was previously doing 50 or 65 miles per hour to suddenly come to a stop while surrounded by a bunch of other vehicles, because that creates an emergency for everyone else to slam on their brakes. Especially the way that it had done it, because the van didn't slam on its own brakes. What it had done is it rotated 90 degrees and then come to a sudden stop, which is a much faster deceleration than you could normally do just by applying the brakes. So it was good that when I saw the earlier sudden movement, just a flash and just a few seconds earlier, it was a good thing that I let off the accelerator and started putting distance between myself and the van. Because by doing so, when the actual emergency happened, there was enough distance between me and the van, and there was also enough distance between me and other vehicles around me, because I had started to slow down. They had also started to slow down. So we were able to be in a situation where the van was able to crash, but the van was the only one affected. This was many, many years ago. I still remember it just because it was one of the few times in my life where I felt like I had that experience where I saw something coming, I reacted gently and calmly, and then the thing I was concerned about actually happened. But it was a non-event, turned out to be a non-event, and no one was seriously hurt. There are many situations that can come up like this in our life that have to do with being observant, understanding risk, and taking risk or not. If I had had an extreme reaction to that event, maybe I would have stopped driving, because maybe it would have freaked me out, and I would have thought, well, what if that happens again? Maybe next time it won't be so far away. Maybe next time I'll be in the crash. Maybe I'll be hurt or killed. I easily could have gone down all kinds of roads thinking about the risk that I had observed. But I didn't think about it that way. What it became instead, and not just that one example, but driving in general, eventually became for me a benchmark of gauging risk. Now, you can choose just about any benchmark in your life that you like, but I chose driving and commuting. So let me explain what I mean by what I'm getting at with this episode about taking risks and judging them against a benchmark. There are a few decisions in my life that I've taken where people generally say that, or not everybody, but certain decisions were seen as risky enough that people felt that they needed to speak up and tell me that I was taking a risk that they thought was not worth it. One of those was moving from Phoenix to Chicago. I'd grown up in Phoenix. Everyone I'd ever known, up to that point, all my friends, all my family, everybody lived in Phoenix or somewhere other than Chicago, right? I didn't know a single person in Chicago. From my point of view, I was moving for a job, and not just a potential job, but a job I already had. I was working in a call center, and my employer wanted to open a new call center in Chicago. And so I wasn't changing employers. My pay wasn't going down. In fact, it was going up a little bit. And from my point of view, the only real difference between the job I was doing on Friday, before the day I moved, and the following Monday when I arrived in Chicago and was going to start work the following day, the only real difference is that I was doing exactly the same job but in a different office. And so sure, a new city and a new surroundings, those offer different challenges, but to me they didn't seem to offer any additional risk. Even though several people, when they learned that I was making this move, they saw it as risky and they told me that I was brave for making that decision, which surprised me. I didn't think it was brave. I just thought it was a good opportunity. All right. So that's sort of a key moment in my life. It's not dramatic. It's not an, oh my God, kind of moment you'd make a movie about or anything, moving to Chicago. But it's the first clear memory I have of doing something that many people gauged as risky and I didn't, and I consciously chose to keep going forward. And it taught me a lesson about how people see risk and how some people see a lot of risk everywhere all the time, and I don't see as much risk. I also see opportunities like that as, I think about what's the worst that could possibly happen, right? So I moved to Chicago with this job. I already have a guaranteed income. The worst that could happen is I completely screw up the call center. I get fired. I lose my job. And now I'm in a new city and I don't know anybody and I don't have a support network. First of all, that didn't happen, right? I was doing literally the same job. I was a call center manager in Phoenix. I was simply going to be a call center manager in Chicago. Now, granted, with a new team, screening and hiring new people, training new people. But there were a couple of things. One, I was supported by engineers in the Chicago area that had already been living in the Chicago area. And the team I was going to hire for the call center included one person I had brought with me from Phoenix who I trusted a lot. And so in order for me to fail completely, all of us, all the existing folks and the person I had handpicked to come with me, we would all have to fail together in order for the enterprise not to work. Now, I can say that now looking back, I didn't necessarily think of it that way at the time. But that's about how the risk was. And although it was only a few years later, I think 2 or 3 years later, where I moved on from that job, it turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. Now, it was hard to be away from friends and family, and I still go back to Phoenix every year and see some people. Not every year, I guess, but most years I try to see at least some subset of people that I grew up with. And I still reflect on the decision to completely uproot myself from everyone and everything I'd known as a really good thing, because it taught me something about how there was an opportunity here and not just risk. So let me just say that again. Was there risk in the situation? Yes. Was it greater in probability than the potential opportunity, which is I would learn something, I would grow, I'd take on a new challenge, put myself in a better position long term to take on even bigger challenges? In my calculation, it was worth it. And it's not like I wrung my hands about this or really worried about it. Honestly, when this opportunity came up, it was in a meeting of all the call center managers and our supervisor. And he had said, it was a guy named Nick, he said, hey, we're looking to open a call center in Chicago. And I butted in immediately. And before he could even finish his sentence, I said, I'll do it. Just immediately. It was a reaction. It wasn't even a conscious thought, really. He was surprised. Not that I'd volunteered, but he had said later that he was actually worried that no one would want to do it and that it would be very difficult to find someone to do it. And that was his concern going into the conversation. And yet, before he could even finish his sentence, he had the answer, which was, I happen to want to do it. So how does this all relate back to the story about the van crash and driving and such? Several years later, after I'd moved to Chicago, I gently introduced myself to what it felt like to take risks more and more. And I never wanted to be reckless or careless, but I did want to understand if I was not taking enough risk, meaning if there were more opportunities out there that I could capture if I tried, and that I was willing to accept some degree of failure, so long as if I kept swinging the bat, if I kept showing up, that the aggregate number of opportunities would be greater in value than the losses I would suffer along the way. And the way this relates to the car and the crash and driving is that at some point I had taken my general attitude toward risk and crystallized it into this thought, which is millions of people, billions of people really, every day get in a car and they commute somewhere, whether it's going to get groceries or to an office for a job or whatever. They get into a car, and most people, most of the time, don't really consider that a risky thing to do. We're all very familiar with getting in a car and driving somewhere if you own a car. And so the idea of driving a car being risky, we all kind of know because we carry insurance that there's some risk. But most of the people I talk to don't consider driving a car inherently so risky that they're unwilling to do it, right? The obvious benefit of, say, commuting for a job is that with a car, you can reach a broader radius of jobs around where you live, and that opens you up to more opportunities. And in my particular case, I live within, a few minutes driving distance of the Chicago downtown job market. And so that opens me up to many, many more opportunities than, say, if I didn't drive, although in Chicago you can also take a train and it's every bit as good, sometimes better. Or if I lived, say, in a small town where there wasn't as large a job market. So this crystallized in my mind as anything in life that is as risky or less risky than getting in my car on an average day and going for a drive. I'm just going to treat that situation as if it has zero risk, so long as there's some potential benefit. So whatever it is in life that could be seen as opportunity, there's some potential benefit for taking a small amount of risk. If that small amount of risk is, in my view, as risky or less risky than just driving a car to an office every day, I would just treat it as if it had no risk at all, because we all Many of us get in a car and drive to an office or commute on a train or whatever, and we never think about it. We don't think about the risk because it's just our routine. So I bring this up to kind of encourage the question in your mind, what is your benchmark for risk? What are things in your life that actually, they contain some risk? All action contains some risk of failure. But are there things where inside of that risk, there's also an opportunity? It's like rolling dice. And, well, in the case of commuting a car, right, it's like rolling a dice and there being like 1,000 to 1 chance that you're going to be totally fine. And maybe, 1 in 1,000 chance that something's going to go wrong or something. But the benefit of taking the risk is you have that job and you're getting the income from that job and you're learning things from the work that you're doing and connecting with your coworkers and that kind of thing. It seems in that case, the benefit outweighs the risk hugely. And the reason is, yes, although you could get in a job and on any given day, you could be in a terrible car accident, you could even die. Because you can play the game over and over again, because you can go to work every day and you're getting a little bit of benefit every day, even though you could frame it in extreme sense and say you're risking death in order to earn that money. The likelihood of death is so small that so many, billions of people just take the risk because it's not really all that risky, it turns out. So what things in life are you avoiding doing because they contain some risk? And have you thought about whether they're actually all that risky? Like, what's the potential benefit? What are the odds? Are they in your favor? What's the worst that can happen? Right? Because we could all die in some freak accident today, or have some freak death. You can have a heart attack or something. Those things, you won't see those things coming, and yet they are possible, although they are improbable. And are you trapped by fear sometimes? Or maybe there are certain set of circumstances where you won't take any risk, and in others where you will. So I'll make one last analogy just to make this a little bit more concrete. Imagine you walking down the street and someone randomly on the street asks if you want to play a game. And the game is this. The person you're meeting is going to flip a coin and you have to risk $1. And if the coin comes up heads, you'll get paid $1, right? You'll walk away with $1. And if it comes up tails, you have to give let me correct that. If it comes up tails, or if it comes up heads, you get $2 back. If it comes up tails, you lose the $1. Okay, so to play the game, you take $1 out of your wallet, you give it to the person running the game. If the coin comes up heads, you get $2 back, so your original $1 plus $1. And if you lose the $1 you put in. Now, should you play that game? What are the odds, right? Let's assume that the person asking you to play the game is not, they don't have an agenda, that they're not secretly gaming or twisting the game in any way, and that the coin is truly a fair coin. So there's a true 50-50 chance that you're going to come out ahead versus losing. Should you take that risk? Well, basically, yes, you should, for 2 reasons. One, if you happen to lose, okay, if you only lost $1, not the end of the world, not a big deal, right? But if you win, you double your money. Now, the question of whether or not you should play that game is an even more emphatic yes, if you're allowed to play the game as many times as you want. So, for example, let's say I start with $1, and let's say I play 10 times in a row, and I lose every time. Now, I might start losing faith that the coin is actually fair in that case, but let's just say hypothetically that the coin is still totally fair we've just had bad luck and we've just had a streak of 10 failures in a row. Okay. So that means I've lost $10. Should I play an 11th time? Well, if I'm only going to play one more time, no, I shouldn't. But if I'm allowed to play as many times as I want, then I absolutely should keep playing. And here's why. Because I'm going to get, if the coin is truly fair, then if I play enough times, then I will eventually get an equal number of wins as I do losses. So let's expand the game out from a sample of 10 or so and say we're going to play 100 times. No matter what happens, assuming the coin is truly fair, like maybe it's a coin out of your pocket, right? Like you chose the coin. Maybe even you're allowed to flip it. So there's no influence from the person asking you to play the game. What does any of this have to do with creativity? Well, it takes a lot of risk sometimes, and I'm not talking about reckless risk or gambling. It takes some risk to venture out to do something that is creative, because there's this fear that if it doesn't spectacularly succeed the way that you hope it will, that you will somehow be at a loss. And I would say, so long as you're not risking more than you're willing to lose, if it doesn't work out, then you're gaining the probability, you're gaining the possibility that you might succeed and you might feel fulfilled and you might feel really glad that you took the risk to finish the thing, to build the thing, to get it out there in the world. And so long as you're not pushing yourself to reckless levels where you're not spending so much time and money and effort that if your creativity fails that you're going to be homeless or, in a tough spot, then you can keep playing the game as long as you want. As long as you keep your risks measured. And when one does finally pay off, you'll be better for it. Not only in the sense that your creativity paid off, but all of that work and effort and the things that you learned along the way and the struggle you went through and the memories you built. So that's my episode and that's my message for the day. I hope you're in a situation where you feel like you can examine the risk in your life and take a few chances without gambling or doing anything reckless to put yourself in a bad position if you lose, but just to get a little more comfortable with taking a few minor risks here and there just for the sake of pursuing your creative life and putting yourself out there until you get to the point where taking a little bit of measured risk becomes comfortable, and suddenly you may have a moment in your life where you no longer see that little bit of risk as dangerous, and you start seeing it as the cost of getting yourself out there and doing your creativity. And that the reward, the emotional reward, the confidence reward you get from getting out there and doing the work and taking a chance. You may find that it takes a really long time, years, maybe decades, but that on the whole, you'll be glad that you did those things, that you tried, than if you don't. This has been the Wilderness and the Wellspring podcast. You can find me on the service previously known as Twitter under the username @JeffLuntGames. You can also find me on Substack at wildernessandwellspring.substack.com. I want to thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.